Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises. Today we are combining the two directors we've been discussing, Ridley Scott and the Coen Brothers. And part of that's because me and my guest have kind of experienced the plot of the Coen Brothers film we're discussing today. We were originally going to do this episode in August. I came back from vacation and got COVID. And then about less than a month ago, you were sick when we were trying to record.
Yeah.
And so my guest today, David Sleep. I'm going to say it wrong.
I just
I know you just told me and I was about to say it wrong.
see slick.
C Slick. First of all, thank you very much for coming on the show and being able to rearrange the timing for us for this
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
and combining both movies. Because the other reason I decided let's do the other film, which will be Alien Covenant. I know that sounds like a weird double feature, is because it's spooky season, and I was like, well, that's a good time to cover this movie. But oddly, even though these are weird films to watch together, they are kind of asking similar questions like, why are we here? Who
Yeah.
created us? What is the point of the universe?
Coming at it from two very different perspectives, though.
Very different perspectives. But you're the guest, so which one of these would you like to talk first?
I think we should go for a serious man first, but that's mostly just because I think it's the much more human story, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. Totally. So you mentioned this was your favorite Coen Brothers movie, which I can kind of get, because it feels like it might be like the ultimate Coen Brothers movie because it feels like they're like being very self-referential of not only like creating their own, recreating like their youth through the story of this movie, but also like the plot is very much pretty much every plot of a Coen Brothers movie, like just chaos happening.
Yeah, although this is very specific to a certain type of story they're trying to tell, and I thought it was interesting that I don't remember. I think he was a writer for the Guardian. Todd McCarthy wrote a while back that a serious man is the kind of picture you get to make as a director after you've won an Oscar, because it's kind of the carte blanche movie where it's a little weird, a little bit out there for the general audience, but it's definitely a story that as a director you want to tell for whatever reason. And in this particular case, it is very intrinsically connected to their upbringing and their faith as two Jewish men.
For sure. And I think the thing you hit about that piece saying it's the kind of movie you make after winning an Oscar, that makes total sense because, like, not that the Coens were ever like making very expensive movies where, like, how dare they get this approved? Like, these crazy ego, most of their movies are pretty limited budget, but like, just the nature of this film is like, yeah, I won an Oscar, so I can pretty much do what I want now. We've been anointed as like those marquee filmmakers. Like everything we make now, people are anticipating, or at least, film journalists, people in those circles are like, is this going to be Oscar worthy or is this going to be up to snuff of the other Coen Brothers films?
And at this point, they also had pretty established themselves as being kind of a quintessential film nerd, director duo. I mean, they're by this point in their career, they're up there with like what's his name? Oh, Royal Tenenbaums. Why am I forgetting?
Wes Anderson.
Yes, like Wes Anderson, or people that like when they put out a film, all of like the introspective film circles are all like a buzz always.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting that they, after No Country for Old Men, the next two movies they do are Burn After Reading and A Serious Man, which I both feel like they're like self-referential of them, of like their plots and their movies.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And they're both really interesting, and to me, a lot of ways subversive movies because
Oh,
they're not really telling a story in a narrative format that most, at least Western audiences, are used to, and are telling it from a very different perspective than a lot of people are used to.
yeah, I would say that A Serious Man might be their most subversive film they've ever made.
Yeah,
You could argue A Man Who Wasn't There possibly is up there with it, but I think this one, because there's really no plot. Like there is a plot, but like there's no meaning to the story other than why does bad things happen? And what also makes this different, because normally in a Coen Brothers movie, it's the effect of karma. Like somebody makes a wrong decision and it just
yeah.
blows up in their face and keeps getting worse and worse. But really, Larry Gopnik didn't really do anything bad. It's just all these chaotic events are kind of blowing up in his face.
I mean, it really is just kind of, some people want to equate it to a retelling of the story of Job, which
Mhm.
I think is a little, because if I don't remember, I don't know if I'm not super versed in all of my books of all that sort of stuff, but that's part. I don't know if that's technically part of the straight up Talmud or the oh crap, the major books of the Hebrew Bible. So like, I I feel like immediately going to the story of Job feels like a very uh, Christocentric way of looking
Mhm.
at it because it is something that's very important to a lot of Christians, but like at the same time, it's more just their way of looking at the same sort of ideas of how do you interpret the universe when you have a specific, especially spiritual worldview in a world that, from the outside perspective, looks like chaos.
Yeah, I can see where people draw the parallels, but I think you're right that that's more of a Judeo-Christian viewpoint of the story. Cuz what's interesting is this movie started out with just they wanted to do a short of like, oh, this kid is stoned out of his mind at his bar mitzvah and he's like having a meeting with this older rabbi that seems like a wizard or sage-like figure. He doesn't really say a lot, but he's got a lot of respect in the community. And apparently, the rabbi character was based off a rabbi they knew as children. But then when they started developing the story, it turned into this, and they said that the plot of Larry was they were getting more out of it than just, oh, what if this kid was high at his bar mitzvah?
Yeah,
And another interesting thing they do is when they open this movie up, they tell like a little Hebrew folk tale, but it's not based on anything. They created it themselves. They were like, when they went to look for a story, they just decided they didn't know enough Hebrew folk tales. They're like, well, we'll just create our own. And they say it
yeah,
has nothing to do with the movie. They just wanted to set up the mood
yeah,
before the film
exactly.
started.
Well, I always found that a really interesting choice because they chose to go with the mythological creature of the Dybbuk, which
Hmm.
is already such a, especially in our culture, a very uh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like it has all of this baggage attached to it, and 90% of it is pure fiction. Because in actual Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is a spirit, does not have a body. It can't be trapped in boxes. So the whole like people who sell and buy Dybbuk boxes online and have like those YouTube channels where they're like, I bought a Dybbuk box, I'm gonna open it up and see if creepy things happen. Like that's all based off of people, especially outside of the Jewish faith,
Hmm.
taking this very Jewish, mythological creature and trying to insert it into the 21st century.
So I want to backtrack a little bit here. Are you a fan in general of the Coen brothers as filmmakers?
Oh yeah, I love them. I remember I was excited opening weekend, and probably the only person in my friend group excited to go see Hail Caesar.
Oh wow, yeah. I kind of feel the same. It actually was a Valentine's date movie for me and my wife is not a fan of the Coen Brothers, but like she really liked that movie quite a bit.
I mean, as far as like their comedies go, I thought that was a really top notch one. It was very much them while still being their brand of weird.
Exactly. And we ended up double featuring it with Barton Fink because we didn't have a guest for either one of those movies. And it actually was a pretty good double feature. I mean, because they kind of deal with similar subject matter, though I would say Hell Caesar is definitely more a broad comedy than
Yeah.
there's a lot more existential stuff going on in Barton Fink
Well, and
with
Barton Fink kind of really comes from a more corporate, I think, sort of like idea of like what like a story it's trying to tell, whereas everything around Hail Caesar is just wrapped up in old Hollywood.
mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that movie is really a love letter to old Hollywood, and in the same way that like the last Tarantino movie was a love letter for him for his idea of old Hollywood. This is definitely how the Coen Brothers see old Hollywood.
Yes, and I think that's what works in the movie. Plus, you've got all these top-notch actors given like a little scene here and there. So, what about this movie do you feel or respond to that you're like, this is the one I like the most, or this is the one I think is their best?
I just really appreciate the being able to come at it from a very specific cultural perspective, and they don't really coddle the audience or try to handhold them through these things. They present them as they appear in the real world, and then they don't make a statement on it. They just say, this is it. Now it's your job to go out and do whatever you have to do to square it in your own mind.
Yeah, they're very much like this is just the story we're telling. Like it or don't like it, we're the Coen brothers. You sort of know what you're getting into when you watch one of our movies. And then it's just over. But I mean, it's very much anyone can relate to this, like, because we all experience good times, bad times, and a lot of the times when bad things happen, there's no reason or excuse it happened. It just did.
Yeah. And I always another reason I really love this movie is I find it very, especially it was the very subversive part of it that where the central thesis, in my opinion, of the film, in a very like in a film that's trying to tell a very kind of a story from a very Jewish perspective, they put the thesis in the mouth of Clive Park's father, the South Korean student who is blackmailing him, and it's just it is the central, in my opinion, thesis of the film, and that's just accept the mystery.
Yeah, that's what so uh I wanted to wonder how, speaking of the dad, how you interpret the scene when the neighbor comes over and asks if he's bothering you. Do you think he's asking Larry or is he asking Clive's father? Because Larry and the neighbor have already gotten into a argument about the neighbor like mowing his side of the lawn and stuff.
Yeah, I'm pretty. I think it was meant to be kind of a dig at him, so it was definitely not more directed to Clive.
Okay, so he was like, I don't like this guy. But I like they're totally ignoring everything he's trying to say, and they're like, "Just give me a passing grade." And he's like, "But you failed the test." And he's like, "I understand everything but the math." And he's like, "But the math is part of."
Exactly.
It's like, oh, poor guy. And then Easter egg, the guy he's talking to on the phone when we find out his son has been like using his name to open up a Columbia House account. Reference for anyone young watching, there used to be a service where you bought records or movies and you paid a monthly fee and you got like so many records a month.
So I actually used to scam them back in the day because you paid a penny and you got like 12 or something, and then you
Yeah.
could immediately cancel. You didn't have to buy another month.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do that, and then I would do it again after a few months, and do it again. And I, I have a huge record collection because of that.
Good for you finding a loophole in that system. But the representative on the phone that he's talking to is the same guy in Fargo that William H. Macy's talking to when he's like, I need that insurance claim or whatever on the car.
Yeah.
But this was like Michael Stuhlbarg's first like big role as an actor. I can't even remember.
Not really his big first role as an actor. It's his big like first leading role as an actor.
So what was
He's been in a lot of stuff
I
before.
know he was a character actor, but I can't remember what he was in. I recently watched Body of Lies because we've been doing the Ridley Scott movies, and he popped up in a scene in there that is a year before this.
I mean, he's been active as an actor since '93. So
Oh wow. I guess he was just one of those guys you just didn't know who he was. He was just
yeah.
always there.
But yeah,
And
I mean,
then
before Serious Man, he was in Cold Souls, Body of Lies, After School, The Gray Zone.
okay.
Actually, The Gray Zone was written or was it was it, he plays a character named Cohen in that, which I think is
Oh,
interesting.
interesting. But yeah, this is his first leading role and then kind of elevates him to getting a lot of more interesting work and at least people recognizing him like, "Oh, that guy."
Yeah,
And
because he goes directly from that to Martin Scorsese's Hugo. So
mhm, kind of playing a similar type of character, but I guess he has that look, right? He has that scholarly, obsessive look. I mean,
yeah,
he's played a lot of government people too, but and what's interesting is they almost cast I don't know if they almost cast or they were considered. They almost went with Mark Maron and Patton Oswalt as the two characters. Patton Oswalt playing the Richard Kind role.
wow, that would have been very weird.
But I don't
But
know if
I can see him do it. I can see Patton pulling that off.
I can see Patton for sure, but I don't know because I've really Mark Maron's limited acting he's done. He's basically just playing versions of himself that he from his stand up and his podcast.
Yeah, he always does that.
So I don't know if I would sympathize with Mark Maron as much as I do Michael Schulbarg in the role because Michael Schulbarg brings that kind of everyman quality to it. Is like where either you can relate to Larry or you're like, oh, I know a guy like Larry. He's a nice guy, you know?
Yeah,
And it's like, wow, poor Larry. Like, then he finds out his wife's cheating on him with this older dude when she's like kind of shocked because everyone's like, Cy Abelman. And I don't know if it's because he's old or how he looks, because, you know, he's not like anything like you normally would see in this scenario where you find out your wife's cheating on you. And then they're like, they mention that his wife hasn't been, and they're like, it's been 3 years. It's like, she's not even cold.
yeah.
And another interesting thing is these aren't actors that normally work with the Coens before. Like, I don't think any of them were actors who we've seen previously in a Coen Brothers movie because they're pretty known for like working with certain actors over and over again.
Yeah, but I believe a majority of them were friends with the Coens beforehand. So, like, I mean, just because it's not necessarily their go-to people all the time. I think this was also, their attempt as directors to kind of uplift a lot of their friends that hadn't had, opportunities. Because a lot of, I mean, if you look at like a lot of actors that were in their early work, I mean, that was people that they had befriended in their, getting started in their career, and they used their career to help uplift them as actors too. So
For sure, Francis McDormand, John Turturro, John
yeah,
Goodman, Steve Buscemi, like all those actors kind of got elevated to higher status from working with the Coens.
yeah, because a lot of the actors that they picked, I've always picked, especially in stuff that were ostensibly comedies, but knowing the Coen Brothers, a comedy is a little bit different. Uh, it really like it, they. That's one of the things that's really interesting about them as directors is they're able to utilize their brand of comedy to take people that are just like character background actors and elevate them to a different level using just the style of their brand of comedy or dark comedy or whenever they do serious movies when if they decide to bring in people like that as well, which they do have done from time to time.
For sure. Another thing mentioning that Stuhlbarg played a character named Cohen in near the end of the film when he's going through the grade book and changing Clive's grade. All the other students are crew members on the film.
Oh, fun! I love when they do that on movies.
It's like, oh, that's a little nice little Easter egg. And as far as the plot goes, I can kind of understand like the wife's frustration with especially because his brother is like stuck there living with him and that is taking a strain like on the whole family.
Yeah, but I feel like that's I don't know. It's hard. Just a very cultural thing. A lot of Semitic peoples and that sort of Southwest Asia area, like people that come from that area originally, it you tend to have a lot of the family sticks together kind of no matter what, and a lot of times you do have to you know uh, prop up problem children or brothers in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it's not out of the question, if somebody has a sibling or a parent or a child going through something like this, of course you
Yeah,
would let them live.
it's a very American perspective to be like, I'm going to toss somebody out on the street if they're family.
That's true. It is a very American thing to not sympathize and be like, "Well, you're messing up my little routine and my lifestyle. Like, I need you to go." So I feel Larry because it's his brother and he loves him, but at the same time, he's feeling that strain on strain that's happening to him.
Yeah,
And then you think things are coming on the up and up for him, and then a tornado hits.
yep, that is life.
And the other interesting thing about the making of this movie is like a lot of it does take place at that synagogue slash school Hebrew school.
Yeah,
And so the Coens being the efficient filmmakers that they are, because there's rules with working with minors, they can't work as many hours as adults. They don't
yeah,
work the whole 12-hour film schedule usually. And so
yeah. I
the
believe it's
co
half.
yeah, the Coens built a lot of the other sets, rooms within the same building so they could be like shooting other scenes when they couldn't use the Hebrew or synagogue stuff.
Yeah, I would have to say that's probably a real nice perk about being a direction team is you can technically film two things at once if you have the people for it.
That's true, and I don't know exactly how they do that. Like if they're like they do scenes individually or they always shoot together. Famously up until the 2000s, Joel was the only one credited as director, and they always credited Ethan as the producer. But that they've always co-directed till recently, and the only reason they put one was because it was like a directors guild issue about sharing credit for
Hmm.
whatever reason.
Well, I know that even on most films where there is just one director, you'll have multiple things filming at once all the time. But it's yeah, I feel like there's a little bit difference when you're just like doing like fight choreography that's being done by a DP or whatever, out somewhere just doing stuff with stuntmen versus having two people with a definitive vision for a film that they've been working on from since the writing process that are able to kind of piggyback work off of each other for different things.
Yeah, and there's always like a first assistant, second assistant, and there's always like second unit stuff or reshoots that have to be done. Like there's always someone besides the main director
Yeah,
directing scenes, so
yeah.
to
Nine
speak.
9 times out of 10, especially nowadays, director mostly, unless they're filming their main stuff and then they watch dailies in between shots to make sure everything else is going the way they want it.
Well, that's been famous for a lot of Marvel movies. I don't know if it is with some of the bigger name directors they've gotten, but I know like other directors who've worked on Marvel movies have been like, the team has been like, well, don't worry about this stuff. We'll take care of this and the effects and posts. Just, worry about the scenes with the actors and
Yeah,
things like that. So, like, that very much happens a lot in our blockbusters sometimes,
yeah,
depending on who they get to direct them, like, where they're not always shooting everything and seeing everything. But I mean, what other performances or scenes or thing? Oh, another little Easter egg about this: the lawyer that Adam Arkin's character recommends he hires for his brother apparently is a real lawyer in Minneapolis.
oh really?
Yeah, so
That had to be a
people
nice little, free advertising for you.
people in Minnesota get a bigger laugh out of that because it's a real guy they know or have probably
Yeah,
seen his commercials or something.
exactly.
But what other scenes or performances you want to highlight in this film?
I don't know. It's just I feel like, at least for me, the final shot with the conversation between Clive's father and Larry is probably it just sticks in my mind so much. It overshadows so much of the film in a lot of ways, and I think it's just because it had such a profound effect on me as a viewer. And then it's like it's that, and then everything leading up to the final shot of the film are just like the most powerful parts of the movie.
So for me, I feel like this is very much a ultimate Cohen's, but like I can very much get your opinion and reaction that you love it and it's one of your favorites. But if someone told me like I don't get this movie, I don't like it, I could totally understand why they wouldn't
Oh
like the
yeah,
movie too. Like it's that
it's
kind of
it's definitely it's one of those movies where, and the kind it reiterates the point of the film. It's how you look at it. Like the whole point where he goes to the rabbi and the rabbi's like, you got to refocus, like you got to reorient your view on things here. That's how you're going to get through this, and that's kind of the point of the movie in a lot of ways too. So, and I think that's why it is kind of the movie that it is, where people can come out with such different views of it.
well, and I think that's the very nature of just not just life, but if you're a faithful or religious person, or you believe in some sort of higher power than humans, like that's ultimately what you have to give into is like, what's your perspective, and you just have to accept that this is how the universe works, and sometimes it's going to be in your favor, and sometimes it's not, and
Yeah,
sometimes you're gonna question things and just because someone is a so-called expert or works in that field, they don't have all the answers because life is ultimately a mystery and we never know what's gonna happen from day to day.
exactly. And like Mr. Park said, you gotta accept the mystery sometimes.
So before we move on, this movie was because at this point in the Coens, they had become those anointed filmmakers in not just film nerd world, but like in the industry as like, oh, these are guys we've got to pay attention to. And so this did get a Best Picture nomination because this was the first year they extended the amount of films that could be nominated for Best Picture, and many people claim that is because the Academy did not nominate The Dark Knight, and so many people were like, "How could you not nominate The Dark Knight?" So apparently, they
Yeah.
extended the amount of films allowed, but I believe it was only nominated for picture and original screenplay, which makes sense because the Coens are some of the best screenwriters and they're very good
Yeah.
with dialogue. Like, especially if you love like those 30s and 40s comedies, like their dialogue is very reminiscent of that type of screenwriting where it's like that rapid back and forth with people. But do you feel this movie was robbed of a Best Picture Oscar from The Hurt Locker?
So the Oscars are one of those really weird things where, and I think I heard it from Slash Film a few years ago, and I agree with it from them that the Oscars really should be a you're looking at the year 5 year previously, so you're looking at it with more perspective because I think you get more equitable outcomes that way. But as it sits now, 9 times out of 10, the people that are the voting block of the Academy only have so much time on their hands to watch so many movies, and they get so many screeners that it it's the nature of the beast that things that win Best Picture 9 times out of 10 probably are going to be forgotten. Like, what was that movie that was in black and white that won like 5 or 6 years ago?
The Artist, because it
Yeah,
was
The
a
Artist.
silent
Like,
movie.
I
That
don't
was
even. I have never seen it, and like I don't know anybody who goes back and goes like, no, this was a movie that it was definitely Best Picture because it left a lasting impact on society. It's like, no, like you really got to
well,
like it really needs to be a 5 year thing. Like the
of
2000 and the 2000 Academy Awards should be awarding for the year 2015. You know,
right. I do think of recent I think Parasite is going to be one that holds up as winning, not just because it made
yeah.
history being the first international film to win, but I think it's saying things that are going to stay topical.
And to be fair, that director has made on par movies for a long time like that, and should probably have been nominated way before this. So.
I think The Hurt Locker, while maybe not being someone's personal favorite of those 9 films that won, I think especially at the time it made sense.
Yeah, it was prescient for the moment, I think. Although it is definitely a propaganda film at the same time
Oh,
too.
for sure. I do appreciate that it treats the movie like, well, this is this guy's job, and it doesn't try to get too involved in the politics and of what most war movies are, and like that this guy just has to be over there because he doesn't know how to function in the regular world. Like apparently picking cereals is more stressful than disarming a bomb for him.
Yeah,
So I think it's not one of those where I'm like, what were they thinking scenario. And also it also made history because it's the first time a female director won Best Director,
that's
Catherine
true.
Bigelow. So
Yeah.
it's one of the more it's also though one of the lowest grossing Best Picture winners, but it's gonna have that history mark on it. And there's definitely the Avatar haters who were happy Avatar didn't win.
I feel Avatar is a really strange movie because it's one where I feel like a lot of people like the movie for the spectacle of it, but at the same time, like it's it feels like it was kind of pushed to be this big cultural thing on par with like Star Wars or Star Trek, and it just kind of crashed and burned spectacularly from that perspective. Because I don't
Yeah,
know many. I know people that are just like, oh, a new Avatar movie. It's been a while. That seems interesting, but not anybody who's just like you don't see people at conventions in giant 7 foot tall $1,000 Navi costumes.
right. This is the whole argument with the movie is like it has no cultural, you know, pop cultural immortality, even though it's the biggest movie of all time. I did hear an argument where people were like, "Yeah, but it was a movie that's not based on anything. It doesn't require
Except
you to
for
have to."
Ferngully, the Last Rainforest, or Dances with Wolves. Definitely not based on anything that came before, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely taking story tropes from lots of other things, but what they were saying was like you didn't have to go watch 28 other movies and like be versed in a lot of things. It was like a somewhat original idea, but the spectacle I think is what holds it up.
Yeah.
And we're all like, well, who's going to go see this new Avatar movie? I mean, who knows? Because apparently the re-release did pretty decent at the box office. So,
Well, I mean, like I said, it was a good spectacle movie. It's like I didn't see it in theaters. I actually saw like a Taiwanese, like I was in college at the time. I saw like a Taiwanese rip on my friend's computer in his dorm room, and I mean, even on like a really bad quality rip, you could definitely tell like this is something you would want to see on the big screen.
yeah, just never bet against Cameron because he's always proving everyone wrong when they are wanting him to crash and burn. I
Yeah,
won't be surprised if this one doesn't make as much as the first one, but
yeah, I probably won't. I feel like it won't have the newness to it that the other one did that made people interested. I feel like it'll have legs though. I think that's going to be the biggest
yeah,
thing for it. I think
I
it's going to have it's going to have staying power in that people are going to go like, oh, there's nothing going on this weekend. You want to see that new Avatar movie? All right, let's go do that. It sounds like fun.
yeah, I think that's going to be part of it. I think part of it is people are going to be just curious, like, was for older people who remember the first one, they're going to be like, was it worth
Yeah,
this long of a wait to see a new one?
that will be, I think, the interesting thing. And I agree with you. You don't really want to bet on camera, bet against Cameron too very often. The one thing I do think is strange for him is that and he has done a lot to push forward technology from a filmmaking perspective, but it feels like he wants to push technology in the same way George Lucas has, and I
Hmm.
don't think anyone's going to be able to be on par with him. Like it's the fact that even after he left as a creative, lead at Lucasfilms, like the idea of the fact that we have the volume now is mind-boggling to me. Like I love the fact that he had that saying when they were working on the early films for Star Wars that eventually we'll be able to make these movies out of my garage, and they've done it now. Now they have George Lucas's garage, and it's just like that's really cool. Like I'm looking forward to see what the future is with that tech. Whereas I feel like a lot of Cameron's tech is like very high level stuff, whereas the stuff that ILM and LucasArts and Lucasfilms and Skywalker Sound, they all are kind of more. I mean, they make millions of dollars. They're not. It's hard to call them like street, like blue collar by any stretch of the imagination, but they are
Yeah.
definitely working on tech that can be handled by pretty much anybody. You don't need any special sort of degrees, to do it.
Well, I think this is a good segue. So I will say that I think A Serious Man, I could see people putting this near the top of their list for Cohen's or people putting it in the middle. It's always hard though with their films because I feel like
Have they made a bad movie? Like that's the problem.
they've made two that I would question aren't very good, but also those were two projects that were already in development when they came to
Came in,
them.
yeah.
They
So is it
didn't.
really one of their movies at that point? Like, I feel like I would have to argue their filmography kind of should be strictly put upon things that they write and direct because I feel like it's two separate monsters. Like, oh, this is just something they directed. I mean, that's a different story. Then this is something they wrote and direct. One's like
Well,
purely their baby, and the other thing is a job.
the two I'm mentioning is Intolerable Cruelty and The Lady Killers, which they did end up touching up on the scripts, but those two screenplays were already in development when they came to those projects.
Yeah, and they both sort of outside their wheelhouses in some ways, while also kind of vibe. Like, I think it's because they were the directors, they aesthetically vibe with their filmography.
But I
But
would
this, but
argue,
from a narrative perspective, they don't.
right.
So it's like,
I would say there's probably about 14 to 15 other films that are inarguably great. And it's kind of hard to say, well, which of those three or four do I not put in the top 10? And it's probably just personal preference or watchability for you.
yeah,
It's just hard. Now, I'm not upset they didn't win the Oscars because I can see certainly why The Hurt Locker won even a decade later.
yeah,
It's not The Artist or The King's Speech or even recently, like I think in time people are gonna be like, Coda, oh yeah, that movie. I forgot it won Best Picture.
yeah.
But talking about franchises and, where things go from when it was originally conceived, we get to a movie I admire. I think you remember saying you didn't care for it much, and I personally can see why some people don't like this movie. And I feel like Alien
Th-
Covenant is
this
a comp.
movie is an interesting film for me because it's one of those movies that it is the Logan of Aliens films for me in a very strange way. Like, so when I first saw it in theaters, I came out going, "What was this? This was not what I wanted. This was not the like what I think of as an alien film. It went in very different directions than I expected." And then I just sat on it for a few years, and then like a year or two ago, I guess, I went back and rewatched both Logan and Alien Covenant, and came out really understanding what they were going for. And there's still things that I'm not a huge fan of for both films, but I came out of them liking them a whole lot more than I did after my initial viewing. And sometimes I think you have to be that way with certain films. There are certain films that you're just not going to jive with, or they're maybe not made for you initially, and that you need to grow into, or they need to grow into you.
For sure, it happens all the time, and I think recently with COVID, when everyone's kind of at home and we kind of looking at the shape of where movies, well, maybe even pre-COVID, just kind of where especially our blockbuster movies, I feel like there's a lot of movies getting reevaluated and being like, you know what, this actually isn't bad because at least they're like trying to do something. Like
Exactly. And
you
that's the
can
thing I think
see.
with Covenant is that it's one of those films where, like, in some ways, it breaks the franchise from a uh, ideological perspective for me and what it was going and what made it special, but it's still trying to do something very specific to where, like, and at the end of the day, it was done by Ridley Scott. It is kind of his baby, so I can't fault him too much. It's just it's one of those things where, like, and we can get into it maybe a little later, but the main thing for me is what makes the xenomorph as an alien, as a villain, as a monster, as a force scary, is the Lovecraftian nature of it. That it is something unknowable. It is something ununderstandable. And when you try to make it knowable, it loses that fear factor.
Well, that opens up the whole argument of like, do prequels even work? Because like sometimes I don't need the mystery answered. I don't need to know the origin story. I don't need an explanation. Like just keep it as it was.
Yeah, and I think there's an argument for that for sure. I think that's more something that I feel like a prequel from a horror perspective definitely seems kind of weird and superfluous. But like from other genres, maybe not so much. I know that like I'm probably in the minority that I love the Star Wars prequels,
Well,
and I know that on the base they have a whole lot of problems. But one thing that what I think is interesting, and I think it was definitely an accident, is that you build something that is, and maybe Alien could do this too, but you build something that is not really complete, not really like there are parts of it that don't quite work right, but because it's a franchise property, you can build stuff around it that makes it all come together in the end. Like I don't think the Obi-Wan series would be as emotionally impactful if you didn't have the prequels.
For sure, especially because people were already attached to Ewan McGregor as this character because he played
Exactly.
him, and he was one of the best parts of those three
and
films.
and, and people especially the younger audiences, I think also grew, even though it's a different actor playing him from an animated voice perspective. You get a huge group of people who just love Anakin as a character, but also Hayden Christensen. And I think part of that is just his performance in the films themselves, which I think he didn't do a bad performance. A majority of that people have problems with for him is direction and not his performance. Like, because I was super excited when he was cast because I followed his career before that. Because I used to, as a kid, watch a lot of like kid shows that were produced out of
You
Canada,
were you a
and so
Goosebumps kid? Because
yeah,
he's in
oh
he's an
yeah,
episode of Goosebumps.
he was in an episode of Goosebumps, but he was actually a primary character in this. I can't remember what the show was called for the life of me now, but it was a show where basically troubled teens go to a camp out in the woods, and he was like the goth punk guy. And I was always like,
Oh,
oh, he's cool, because I was into punk. So I was like, yeah, he's awesome. And then he got cast as Anakin. I was like, fuck yeah. So, but like I know a lot of people like the Clone Wars really kind of helped bridge a lot of gaps that people had for Anakin as a character and make his ultimate story a lot more tragic overall.
I I also think that series helped people kind of reevaluate the prequels, and I think part of
Yeah,
because you were saying you're in the minority, I think there's been like this reevaluation of the prequels, especially with the younger generation who didn't grow up being like, "Oh, George Lucas ruined my childhood," because that's their childhood. But I
yeah.
think another thing was love or hate the sequel trilogy, which I kind of have feelings on both, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think it's a great start and a decent middle that cannot stick the landing, but that was because they didn't have a plan. So, all right, what can you do there?
Yeah, let's not. But I think one thing: love them, hate them, enjoy them. You can't say that the prequel trilogy doesn't have a voice. That is George Lucas's vision, for
Yeah,
better or worse. And I think that is another reason people are like, okay, like this isn't as constructually sound as the original trilogy because he didn't have the collaborations he had with those, but like at least I can see what he's trying to do here. It doesn't
yeah,
feel like I'm watching a product.
yeah,
So with Alien Covenant, I wanted to ask, what are your feelings about Prometheus and the overall franchise? Because there's different opinions for different fans. Because there are some people who feel like the only two good movies are the first two, which arguably those are masterpieces, and I don't know if anyone's going to ever be able to make a movie as good as those first two.
yeah. I think you could. I mean, I would argue like I've been a huge fan of Alien since I saw it when I was 8 years old. So, and as a kid growing up in California, and like my mom would go in and run errands, and we'd stop at a like it was like a little bodega, and they'd have a little comic rack. I got into the Alien and Predator comics from Dark Horse. Uh, like there are great stories to be told out there. I would argue that some of like the better stories are in some of the books and comics that they've done, and I feel like you could adapt those if you wanted to. But there are stories to tell in that universe that are just they're not necessarily just rehashes of things that have already happened, or trying to explain something that is scarier being unexplained.
So I love this franchise. I pretty much enjoy all of these films
Yeah,
except for the Alien versus Predator movies. I think
I thought the first one was interesting. I liked parts of it.
it's not terrible,
Yeah,
but
but
Requiem is
Lance Henriksen makes anything great. So
that's true. He's just one of those reliable people, and he pops up in a sometimes crappy sci-fi horror movie. It makes it just a little more watchable. But
Yeah.
I think Alien 3 it's not a masterpiece, but I don't think it's a train wreck. I
Oh
think it's
no, I think it's pretty great actually. You're right. It's not a masterpiece, but it's definitely. I think it's an interesting film because it's one of David Fincher's earlier films, and you can definitely see him kind of getting his sea legs with it, and that is, I think, from just a film fan perspective, I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think it's amazing, especially if you go back and hear about the making of that film and like the hard time they had and how the studio kind of micromanaged everything, that he was able to get the movie made that he did. And you can tell like his voice is in there. Like if you watch it, you be like, oh yeah, this is a Fincher movie, even though he disowns it. And especially if you see the assembly cut, it's actually a very interesting and well made film. And I hats off for what they had to deal with that they made it as good as it was.
Yeah,
And Alien Resurrection is just fun. There's conflicting
you're right. It's one of those movies that like it's hard for me. Like it's been a long time since I've watched it. All I can remember from the film, honestly, is ridiculous creature effects, a lot of water, and it being just kind of silly and fun. It was one of those movies where, like, I remember coming out of it and going, like, it didn't blow my mind and rock my world, but man, was that a good time.
well, I think you have conflicting voices here. Like they got Josh Whedon to write the script before. Yeah, I know. Ugh, now you know.
Well, not even just now. Like, he's just never been that great of a script writer. He's it's
It,
it's it's fine. His dialogue's okay, but he tends to lean way too heavily on just like I'm a quippy cool guy.
it's
Like
true.
he is. If you could anthropomorphize finger guns, that is him.
Oh, that's true. Hold on. My dog has opinions on Josh Whedon, not good ones. He's like, sorry about that.
No, you're good.
But you also they hired a French director who's actually a really good director, but you know, I think the studio micromanaged him as well. And so the franchise kind of dies out for a while. And then Alien 5 is in development on and off. It stops because they make AVP. At one point Cameron was going to produce. And then they get Ridley Scott to come back and he does a movie called Prometheus, which really isn't an alien movie. Really, it's
No.
more like Ridley Scott's like, oh, you remember that giant alien, dead alien that was in the ship? What is that guy up to? What is he doing?
Yeah.
And I think he makes a really interesting film that deals with sort of the same questions that happen in Alien Covenant, but I think a lot of people were upset with Prometheus because they wanted it to be more of an alien movie. And maybe some people were upset that he even included elements of Alien. And I feel like while I enjoy this movie and it's interesting, I can see why people don't like it because it's very much a compromised movie in
Yeah.
my because I feel like they're like, okay, Ridley Scott, we'll let you make a sequel to Prometheus, but we need you to make it more of an alien movie, okay? We don't need all your little references to Paradise Lost and Greek mythology and asking about God and why humans are here and why we're recreated. Like, we need you to bring a xenomorph in it to kill people.
Yeah. And the problem that both Alien Covenant and Prometheus have is anybody who worked on the writing of that film don't know how scientists work at all, and decided to basically give PhDs to 10-year-old kids. I guess I don't know. It's very strange.
I get that argument, but at the same time, like, one, that's just the nature of these movies. I mean, John Hurt sticks his face in front of the egg in the first Alien.
Yeah, but he's supposed to be a blue collar worker. That kind of makes sense. Like not like like the fact that like they go down onto this planet in both movies with no real sort of protective like SOPs, standard operating procedures in place for things is just like who thought this was a good idea?
And the last few years we've been living in, people have been doing stupid and saying stupid stuff constantly, and people
And
you
that's
would th
fair, but I mean, they well, and I would argue a lot of the people saying stupid things, if they are smart, quote unquote, or have like degrees and things like that, 9 times out of 10 they're grifters. So
Mm.
maybe not the best, but also to be fair, when it comes to Prometheus, and did he work on Alien Covenant as well? Oh no, he didn't, which is probably why this is a
Are you
better
gonna
film.
Are you gonna do a
Damon,
Damien Lindelof?
yep, he's he has the same kind. Like I mean, he got to start with what's his face?
Lost with J.J.
Yeah,
Abrams.
with J.J. Abrams. They both have the same sort of problems. They're really good at lore and not
Mhm.
really good at execution or like sticking landings.
I would argue Damien Lindelof did really good though with The Leftovers and the Watchmen series.
Yeah, that is true. I will say that. But he's also grown as an artist, whereas I don't feel like JJ has much to be fair.
JJ has not, and I don't want to get on a knock of JJ. I think it's interesting that almost all of his movies have been franchise films, and even the one original movie he did was basically like, I want to do Spielberg.
Yeah,
I think he's really good at being a like showrunner or executive producer, like coming up with a cool idea, but then
yeah,
giving it to somebody else to execute that idea.
yeah. He's like the opposite of Stephen Moffat, whereas Stephen Moffat's a terrible showrunner, but he's really good at like one-off episodes that need to be contained in one specific thing. He's a great writer when it comes to that, but
Whereas the person currently leaving Doctor Who probably should have been. I don't know. He's been a good showrunner on other shows. I don't know what he was doing with, but
I
like
haven't watched any of the new stuff. All I know is that ever since what's his face left, it's kind of been
Capaldi
well,
and
no,
Moffat.
I'm just Moffat's one of those people who's like he's really good at like saying something interesting's coming. I swear, and then it never happens. Nothing materializes.
Yeah, I think he's better as just a writer because like
Yeah,
before he be
he definitely needs constraints. Like that, like some people need that. Like I think a lot of writers actually nowadays could probably do with somebody coming in afterwards and going, shave off 15 minutes from this.
so I think that's a lot of what's going on here is like Ridley Scott wanted to get to like something else besides just recreating what he did in 1979. And I think Fox was like, well, we want an alien movie. But I think there's one thing we can't argue with, and maybe you can, but I think one of the strong suits of both of these films is Michael Fassbender. And we get two
Oh
Michael
yeah,
Fassbender performances in this film.
he's just a phenomenal actor. I don't know how he is in real life because honestly, I would worry that he's maybe a bit unhinged in real life. To be able to pull off some of the stuff he does, he makes me worried sometimes. But
But I mean, he does give two distinct different performances. Like
yeah,
David has got to be like one of the all-time evil AIs up there. You
yeah,
know, well, it's so chilling and terrifying, yet he presents himself as this very well-mannered and sophisticated person, even though he's a robot. And then you have Walter, who's he has an American accent. So it's like they said the reason of this was like David was created by Wayland, so he has sort of that personality, whereas Walter was produced mass manufactured from a company, and he has an American accent, and it's all about, well, this is my duty, and I have to do what
yeah.
the right thing is, like
And
much
it
more
was
like.
definitely a better choice going with another David android, David style android, than like a Handy Joe. I mean, can you imagine if that movie would be with Handy Joes instead?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I regret or miss is that they didn't include Naomi Rapace in this film as Dr. Shaw. Like, they didn't bring her back. They were just like, "Oh, she
Yeah.
died."
Not even just she died, she was murdered.
Yeah.
Like
Like,
that part was really jarring to me because it did definitely feel like she had a plan at the end of Prometheus. There was something going on that they were going to do, and then just to make David this, arch villain for this film, he somehow gets a body back. She rebuilds his body, and then he kills her. Like, oh, okay, that's a choice. The choice you made.
I feel like had Ridley Scott made more of the movie he wanted to, it would have been more of what we got in that brief scene, like just
It
kind
feels
of
like there's a movie missing. Like this
there
feels like
is.
a third. This feels like a third movie in a trilogy, and not the second film.
Yeah, we're missing them whole coming to the planet of the engineers and him infecting the engineers with the very creation that they created.
Yeah,
Like, and they just sum it up because I guess maybe they were like, we need it to be more of an alien movie. And but like this is never boring to me. Like, yeah, there's a lot of flaws, and we can talk about like what their view of scientists are.
yeah. But like I
And
said, my main like I've come out of it really enjoying the film now. But my main takeaway from this is it to me it defeats the purpose and the frightening aspects of the xenomorph, that it's ultimately a manufactured creation. The idea that it could evolve spontaneously out there in the great, dark beyond is much more frightening than, oh no, this is just a aberration of genetically modified weapons. Because especially it it tie in some ways it does tie into the fact that Weyland Yutani wants to turn them into bioweapons, but if they're already bioweapons, then that's just like the idea that there's something natural out there that a company wants to turn into a bioweapon versus basically a company just wanting to reappropriate alien biotech just feels like a cop out, I guess, in some ways to me.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I do think it's more frightening when they're just this unstoppable force of nature with no explanation of how they came to be. But I think there is fascinating stuff going on here. And it is very much like a corporation to do something like that in reality.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that they wouldn't. I'm just saying that like I think the way that the stories are handled when you don't have any of this background work better than now that we have all this background, and especially considering they're trying to connect it all together again. Like if you played Aliens Fire Team, like they reference like Shaw and other things, and there's like the neomorphs are in it and other stuff like that. And like at this point in the timeline, not only Weyland Yutani but other corporations are trying to one up each other by getting their hands on different styles of xenomorphs and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's what makes the first Alien such a terrifying film. Is like you don't know how it got there. You don't know why it like grows so fast. You don't know where it's lurking. And you could argue that Catherine Watterson's character, like they're very much trying to make her like a Ripley-like character, even with like how they dress her and her
Yeah.
hairdo, and even the scene with her disagreeing with Billy Crudup about landing on the planet in the first place.
Yeah, she has the smartest person in the room, big brain idea of following standard operating procedure. And then you have this religious zealot who's just like, nah, this is what we're going to do, man, because of God.
Like that whole scene, I'm like, well, of course they didn't want you in charge of this operation. And then I'm like, but they wanted James Franco in charge.
Well, we don't see enough of James Franco to know much about him.
No, that's fine with me. Like, I've
Yeah,
never was a big James Franco fan before all this stuff that came out about him.
it's a weird. It was a weird choice, regardless. I think because like I when I think of a horror film or even a sci-fi film, if I was going to cast James Franco in anything, he would be like a comic relief. Like he would be like a Ruby Rod, not a serious captain of a ship.
I do prefer him in his comedic roles and like because I don't like him as like Harry Osborn in the Spider-Man movies. I feel like
No,
he's miscast, but I liked him in like Pineapple Express and The
but to be
Disaster
fair, in
Artist.
during the era of the Spider-Man movies, he was also a much more. He was cast in that because the way that his facial structure is, he just has a very stern face, so he can kind of pull off that broody look.
Yeah, I get why he was cast because it was at the time, and he was like one of those. Oh, he can be a brooding, you know, guy. I get it. It's just I preferred him as a comedic actor. That being said, I liked Danny McBride actually in this movie for what he's
Well,
doing.
when he wants to be a serious actor, he's really good at what he does. Like he's a very versatile actor that people don't really give the opportunity for him to be versatile very often.
And that can be said of almost some of our best comedic actors too,
Yeah.
like Bill Murray, Rob Williams, Jim Carrey, even Adam Sandler. I mean, you can even they weren't really comedians, but you can pinpoint Michael Keaton and Tom Hanks. Like these are two guys that started out as comedic actors,
Yeah.
and then people are like, "Oh, they can act."
Yeah. Especially
Which
Keaton. Man, Keaton's just he's a pleasure to watch. I'm currently doing a rewatch with my mom of because she's never seen the Marvel movies. So we got through recently Homecoming, and he's just a fun to watch on screen. I'm kind of bummed out we won't get him in Batgirl, but
I
what are
know
you
I'm
gonna do?
so sad. There's two movies where Michael Keaton reprises his role as Batman, but they may never see the light of day.
Yeah, well, we'll probably see the Flash. So we're gonna get the worst of the two,
I
probably.
know, right? Like of the two to cancel, why don't you cancel the Flash and put Batgirl on
Well, that's the
in
problem though,
theaters?
and I don't want to get into a tangent, but they need the Flash because they're wanting to reboot everything, and that's the best way to do it is Flashpoint. So
I understand that, but like, ugh, there's just so many issues with that movie and the press tour. That's going to be a nightmare. How
I
they
mean,
deal with that?
I think they could recast him and maybe do some like digital things
They could. They
because
totally could.
there could be like where he goes to change the timeline and his whole body changes and he's just like and then okay, it's a new Flash now. Okay.
But you mentioned Lovecraftian, and I think there's a lot of that in this movie, though, especially with the set design and stuff.
Yeah.
Like there,
Although I would still argue that a majority of the set design now it's really hard to separate the set design for like Covenant and it's just people hyping H.R. Giger
that's
because like
true.
he is just the central like you don't have the look, the feeling of Alien without H.R. Giger. And sometimes hyping it can be a good thing. Like, I didn't know this until yesterday because I saw the article that had finally come out. I was looking forward to this game called Scorn, which is a Giger inspired first person shooter. And it is only on the Xbox, and I have a PlayStation, so I'm just like,
Uh,
oh, because I've been looking
hate when
forward to
they
this
do
game for a
that.
while. But yeah, like it's just I mean, I think that's also part of the best parts about this film is the Giger-esque stuff. And from a visual aspect, I mean, that's always going to be a really heavy selling point for an Alien film.
Especially if you're a fan of this franchise, because that's like the cornerstones. Even though he didn't design anything in the James Cameron film, that first xenomorph in the original film is very iconic, very you can't separate it from the rest of the movie. And he even did designs on Alien 3, so he's always been a presence in the franchise from the very get-go.
Yeah, he didn't do character or creature design for Aliens, but they had the Giger books in front of them when they were doing things. Kind of like, at least I think he got credit for it. At least I'm sure, better than some artists. Like, I mean, you could be Tim Bradstreet, the guy who did all the art for Vampire the Masquerade, who all of his art got stolen for Blade and got no credit for until Blade 2 when Guillermo called him and was like, I'm going to pay you this time.
That's because Guillermo's a cool dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I think a lot like Alien 3, even though I don't think Ridley had the production problems that Fincher had because he's Ridley Scott and because he kind of helped create this whole franchise. But I do think he did have to deal with a compromised vision. I think it's amazing that he made as competently made of a film as he did
Yeah.
with it, with the problems that you can tell and feel that there's like two different movies trying to be made here and like trying to combine them, because I think Ridley wanted to do this as a trilogy, and I think a lot of, like you said, this feels like the third movie. I think a lot of this was what he was going to do in a third film, of like at least bringing more of the alien aspect of it. Like I think it was going to be more about, I feel like that little scene we get is what really what was the movie he wanted to make, was like,
Yeah.
well, we're going to meet our creators and now I'm going to expose their creation of this weapon they were going to use on other species on them. And it is kind of interesting, we see at the beginning of the movie like the xenomorph looks different, but by the end it like is what we know the xenomorph to look like.
Yeah.
And also there's a scene early on in the film that is taken from the unwritten script that they were going to do for Alien 3 with the field on fire, when it originally was going to be the monk wooden planet instead of a prison.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's little nods to almost the entire franchise in this movie. But as problematic and flawed as this film is, I'm like, well, at least it's interesting. And I think this is one of the times, because Ridley Scott can be accused of being kind of sometimes a director for hire. Because if you look at his massive filmography, and usually the thing that stands up with him is all his movies are usually visually striking and they look great. Like this movie looks great. You can see why it costs so much money to make.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of the projects he's a little more passionate about. I think he likes these weird sci-fi films about humanity and like why and creator and like the wrestling of that sort of question of like, why are we here? What is our purpose? What are we supposed to be doing? And then our historical epics. I feel like those are his two wheelhouses for the most part. Those are his
Yeah.
like passion projects. And then he does some things in between. And so this film very much ended up kind of getting the same reaction as Prometheus, maybe even worse, because I don't, even the people that like Covenant, I don't hear them like passionately defend it as much as they defend Prometheus. And so now that Disney owns this franchise, I don't think we're going to get a third Ridley Scott film in this
I believe
year.
they said they're still working on it.
Are
Last
they?
I heard. Yeah, I'm not really like, I know some people are always like the Mouse House is gonna try and kidify things. So far, they've not. The Marvel comics have been pretty brutal,
I was going to say they own Hulu. They just released a Hellraiser movie, so
which was amazing. Hellraiser is one of my favorite horror franchises outside of sci-fi horror.
I think they very much understand like this is stuff that's skewed this way. I think they're going to keep things separated. I don't
Oh
know. I
yeah,
know.
that's kind of, I think that was the plan from the whole get go. As soon as they bought Fox, they were like, well, we need stuff that's Mouse House oriented, and we need stuff that's adult oriented, and the things that need to be in between, like Marvel stuff that needs to be in between, we can find a place for it. But like that was the whole impetus, other than getting the nice back catalog of like Oscar, 20th century Oscar films. So
Yeah, and I know they're developing a TV series for FX with Noah Hawley, who did the Fargo series and the Legion series.
yeah. Which one is he developing? Is he developing a? Alien series, or is
Yeah,
he
he's
developing?
developing an Alien TV series.
Okay, because I know that somebody else, because I wasn't sure if it was Noah Hawley or not, but I know somebody's also developing a Hellraiser series. That I know the movie, the new one, they had input from Clive Barker, and but last I heard the television series is going to be like either completely written by Clive or he's going to be like an executive producer on it. He's more closely, I think, tied to that than the new movie, but he approved everything on the new movie for sure. I know that.
Cool. I guess before we wrap up on Covenant, you mentioned that this is kind of like Logan for you, which is interesting because Logan was very much beloved when it came out for most people, but I know there
Yeah,
are people that have issues with it because I went to the movies with a guy that was like, "That was fine." He didn't jive with it as much as I did.
yeah. That's basically how I came out of it. And I'll admit, like I have a really, really petty reason for not liking the film. At least when I first came out of the theater, and it was just because like sometimes it's the ending that can really make or break a film for some people.
Hmm.
And when Logan dies and Laura puts the grave, and then she turns the cross into an X, and the music swells, and then it fades out, but you see the X. It's just the standard music for the film, and I'm like, uh, that was the perfect moment to do an orchestral version of the '97 X-Men theme. What?
Well, then
Why
you
would you?
must.
Yeah, and then they did exactly what I wanted with Multiverse of Madness, and I was so pumped.
I was about to say you must have been like, ah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the new X Men '97 show too. That's gonna be so
Me
good.
too. I love that show. I know some people. There was someone on our page that was like, "It's not as good as these other shows because of the animation style," and I was like,
I mean, it was the early '90s. It was there to sell toys. It was
"Yeah."
fine,
I was
and the toys
like,
were great. I'm as
I'm
somebody who
like,
collects toys.
I was
I
like, your
loved it.
opinion. Of course, no one's opinion is wrong. It's an opinion,
Yeah.
But I was like, your argument isn't completely like. I get what you're saying, but I was like, I think from a storytelling perspective, it's right up there with Batman the Animated Series for
I
me.
mean, they're pulling from the greatest era of X Men, which is the Claremont run. So, I mean,
Hmm.
how can you really go wrong? And which, by the way, I'm super excited. He's apparently working on X Men again. So in the comics, so that's cool.
Cool. I didn't know that, but not that these films both came out in the same year and were both Fox films, but John Logan was a screenwriter on both of them.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah. Which I think Logan was brought in to write on Alien Covenant because he had worked on Gladiator, and I
Oh,
and I don't know if
was
that was
he
a
a? Is he like a script doctor then?
maybe he kind of is because he has worked on a lot of things, and I don't know if he was the one that kind of made it more closer to Alien, or they needed something touched up, and if that was a Scott choice or Fox brought him in to work on the screenplay.
Hmm.
But is there anything else you want to talk about Covenant that we didn't talk about? I know we didn't talk about all the different actors that show up, but
Well, there is a
like,
lot in the film, and it, it kind of can be, I think, a little bit overwhelming with that. It has a big cast, and then out of that big cast, there's really only two, maybe three people that are really important.
I think really the only standout besides Fassbender is probably Watterson. Like,
Yeah.
Billy Crudup's fine. He's doing his, being the sort of dumb person left in charge because he's just in the hierarchy of the chain of command. They really don't give a lot. Like, there's a great Spanish actor that's in here, and he doesn't really get much to do in this movie other than just be a character in the movie. It's the guy that has like the burn mark on his face. He's been in a lot of things. He's now in the Let the Right One In series.
Oh, they're doing a series.
Yeah, on Showtime. He was one of the bad people in the Hateful Eight. Yeah. And Danny McBride's decent. We mentioned him. And there's a lot of actors. There's not like big name actors, but they're recognizable actors. Like the lady playing Crudup's wife is also in Fantastic Beasts with Watterson. She's the American leader of the Makuza or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just more like recognizable character actors, I guess, or people that just aren't well known.
Yeah. I would say one thing I have to say, like from an acting perspective, even though Watterson is a pretty great, performance in here, I don't feel like she had the same sort of like gravitas and like she doesn't give me the same sort of impression with her performance the same way like Naomi Rapace did. Like that's a real disappointment for me.
I would agree. I think Rapice gives a much better performance. I understand why Rapice's character is there, why she like her struggles between science and her faith, and like it's a much stronger performance. But I think Prometheus is a much more realized film in Scott's vision than this film is. And
Yeah,
that
yeah. I think we're really just coming back to the same point that even though I came around on this movie, I have not come around on it in the same way like I have with Prometheus. Prometheus is just a much more well-rounded film. I feel like Prometheus did something different. There are a lot of things I didn't like in it from an Alien franchise perspective, but the majority of it is pretty great. And then this just kind of really it's compromised on so many levels that even though I enjoy it for what it is and I will tuck it in with the rest of the canon as it stands now, I would just wish it went in some different directions. It's on the whole of pretty compromised. It is a very flawed, decent film.
agreed. And I think Michael Fassbender is the reason, a huge reason why this movie is watchable and interesting.
Yeah, you're right. Like if he was gone, like I said, if you just because you just let's just say that Wayland is not involved in this at all. His corporation's not here, so they have to go with some other company that did androids, so like the Handy Joes. Like this like can you imagine if the Handy Joes were the villains? These mindless automatons that are just following some sort of instructive order. I mean, they
Yeah.
would be creepy. That might add to a little more of the fear factor, but it wouldn't give the narrative weight that Fassbender brings.
I think it would feel just like like them trying to recreate Alien, which, they use a lot of the original Goldsmith score in this film. So I think the inclusion of keeping Michael Fassbender, because I think he's supposed to be like the driving force if they make any more of these
Yeah,
too. I think that's what makes these film, especially this one, interesting because of the compromised nature of it. You take him out, then it just feels like them trying to recreate Alien,
yeah,
and it would never be as good as what they did with that film because that's lightning in a bottle.
yeah.
And like
And
you said,
actually, it now the more that I think about it, and I think about beat for beat what it's doing, I mean, you have to replace certain classes of people in this, but like it's more of without David in it, it is almost a beat for beat recreation of Aliens.
hmm because of how many characters there are, and they
Yeah,
they get
like
there,
the
and then
cast is larger. There are more threats than just one single solitary alien creature.
all hell breaks loose. A bunch of people die, and then there's a conflict on the ship, which
Yeah,
also kind of turns into a slasher movie because we have a shower scene near the end of the film. Like, I
yeah.
don't know why that scene's in the movie.
That feels like production over or producer oversight, like executive oversight. Some suit walked in and was like, "No, this is a horror movie. We need a psycho scene. Put the shower in there."
That feels out of place for me in an alien movie. Like, these aren't like a scene where people are getting in their skivvies and about to get down and then get murdered.
To be fair, Sigourney Weaver gets into her skivvies in the first film. In
That's
Alien
true.
3, she's in the shower when the xenomorph shows up.
Okay, maybe there are some narrative.
There is some consistency the presentation and what they are doing narratively is different.
Yeah, I think in the other two films, they weren't used to the same effect because this scene
Yeah,
feels.
it's there for titillation, whereas in, I mean, there is a sense of voyeurism, I think, in Alien when she gets into her
Mm-hmm.
skivvies, but she's only in that for like less than a minute to switch into the spacesuit.
Right,
So, and then the shower scene in 3 is there specifically to push the narrative forward. Like you don't see anything; it's just there to
right.
specifically push the narrative forward that the alien will not kill her.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've always had issue of that scene in the first Alien. I'm like, why is that there? Like,
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, it's very different here. But I'll say it again: the movie's problematic. It's flawed, but compared to other franchise films and blockbuster films that we've been getting prior and now, I think that at least this movie's trying to do something and say something, and you can tell there's a directorial vision
yeah,
as
I can.
much as it's wanting to be product for Fox and like pumping their franchise. I think
And it
Ridley's.
was at the point where they were really ailing too, so you can definitely see that a lot of, I think, the oversight stuff from an executive perspective is kind of desperation.
Hmm. But despite all that, I think Scott came out with making a movie with at least you can see his what he was trying to do, and
Yeah,
I will say it's not boring, in which that is something that is more and more happening with our blockbuster and franchise cinema is that we're getting more films that feel like they're being made by product instead of a person's vision. Well, if there's not anything else you want to say about either one of these movies or these filmmakers, I want to again thank you for your time. Thank you
yeah, sure,
for
anytime.
Yeah. Thank you for agreeing to double up these movies, even though if someone sees this, they'll be like, that's a weird double feature. What is going on here? But like I said, we had our issues trying to get the Serious Man episode done, and then it's spooky season now. So I was
Yeah,
like, well, I just did Prometheus last week, so I was like, let's do Alien Covenant, and I was like, let's just combine them,
yeah.
get it done
Well,
with.
like I said, you never need me again. I'm always here, and it is spooky season, and they just released a new Hellraiser, and I'm pretty well versed in that entire franchise.
Great. We had a wonderful guest earlier for our sideshow we do. So maybe we'll try and squeeze something in. We're going to try and do Halloween 3 and Elm Street 3 next week
Oh, nice.
cuz we were supposed to do that this week because of the new Halloween Ends, which is going to be a very divisive film for people. Some
Oh,
people
really?
are
I haven't seen it yet. I want
yeah, they take a big swing and it's either going to take you out of the movie or you're going to be like, "Oh, that was interesting."
to. Huh. All right.
Approach. Like, so depending on,
Was John Carpenter still involved in
he
this?
still did the music with him and his
Oh,
son.
did he just do the music?
Well, I mean, he produced, but like he isn't creatively involved in
Okay.
these three recent
Yeah,
films.
I really like. I know if I was Electronic Arts, I would throw all of the money at him because he did say recently that he doesn't really direct a lot of films anymore, but he would go back to directing to do a Dead Space movie. And honestly, if the master of horror John Carpenter says I want to do one of your franchise, you'd be stupid not to just be like, yes, here, take all of our money, make it a big budget Dead Space film with him and his creative vision behind it. I really think like as long as it's one of those movies that it needs the budget to make it work, and there's a huge enough fan base within just the gaming community that you probably could make your money back easily without even a general audience consensus.
Yeah, and I would really like him to at least get a good movie out again, like his final
Yeah, because
film.
he ain't got much time left. I
I
don't
would
think.
like him to have a good final film, and he's a big enough gamer that I think he would do a good job with it. Like,
Exactly. I think that would be the cherry on top of his fucking illustrious career.
yes.
And
Well,
honestly, it's almost like it would be almost for him just The Thing too, in a lot of ways, because it has a lot of narrative connective tissue to that sort of idea and genesis. It's kind of what you'd get if the Dead Space franchise is like the bastard baby of like Lovecraft, The Thing, and Alien
Well, I mean, the thing is very much Lovecraftian too.
already. Yeah,
It's kind of its own version. I know it's based on a different story, but it's very much kind of like at the Mountains of Madness, but
yeah,
instead of
exactly. I would argue that it probably, like, if you had to classify it within the pantheon of the mythos, it would probably be some sort of Shoggoth of some sort.
yes. But David, thank you again for coming on. Thank you
Yeah,
for agreeing to reschedule and tackling two movies. I'm happy that when you revisited Covenant that you found more of it to appreciate than your initial reaction to it. And I think that's the beauty of film is because sometimes, yeah, we don't like a movie or there's something about a movie that rubbed us the wrong way. And sometimes it could just be our mood, how we're feeling,
yeah,
the circumstances of how we watch the thing, or just our viewpoints sometimes. And then you revisit a movie a few years later and you're like, oh, that's actually interesting. Or, oh, I can see what they were trying to do there.
exactly.
And even if I don't like a movie, if I can recognize like that they were trying to do something or trying to say something, I can appreciate that even if on a personal level I'm like that's just not for me.
Yeah,
But thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
you too.
I'm glad that the new Hellraiser's good. I've been trying to watch it. I'm probably going to watch it later today.
Oh, I think you're going to enjoy it. I really found it a lot of fun. I, the designs are really great in it, and I think the ending really it did something really interesting, and it sticks it for me really in a nice, like, it's definitely a very ideologically consistent film, which I think is very much appreciated in a franchise where it can be all over the place, especially the last few movies.
As I said, I've only seen the first two and then the one where they're in space.
Oh, that's not, you should definitely go watch the third one. The third one has some of the best dialogue in the entire franchise. Like, that was the movie
Okay.
where they let Doug Bradley really kind of spread his wings as a I'm going to chew the scenery villain.
Oh, okay. Because I know they kind of go downhill, and I know after the fourth one, they pretty much are all direct to video,
Yeah.
and then there's like I think two without Doug Bradley.
Yeah, the
I don't.
last two, and the guy that got doing it in the last movie before the current one is actually not bad. And I've seen a few interviews with him. I actually used to follow for a long time the Hellraiser podcast, and they had him on, and he's pretty cool. And the guy who has been like the director and writer of a lot of the last few films is actually a pretty interesting director. They're trying their best with what they have on hand and the budgets and everything. I feel like if this director had had a better budget, those movies might have been a lot better. Because, like, where they're going for is really interesting. And even though I don't like, in the last film they did before this current one, bringing in angels, like actual, like, biblical angels into it, I thought that was kind of stupid. Because what makes Hellraiser interesting is kind of what makes Alien interesting, and that these are kind of Lovecraftian outer world beings. They're outer gods to a certain extent. Trying to kind of shove them into Judeo-Christian thinking just kind of doesn't work for me. But I did love in that movie the idea of, like, underlings to the Cenobites that they introduced with the Stygian Inquisition, which I thought was pretty cool.
But before I cancel and like cut this off, is there anything you want to plug or maybe your social media? If not, you don't have to. I
Oh
just
no,
always
I
ask.
I currently don't have anything in the pipeline right now. The only, I mean, I haven't. I just got moved in, got my stuff set up, and I'm still working on unpacking. But I do a lot of miniatures painting, so I'm, Mandalore Forever on TikTok, and I post my miniatures there.
Oh, cool. Well, if you guys want to check that out, check it out because that's awesome. So thank you again. appreciate it, and I'll keep you in the pipeline of what we're working on next. And yeah, if there's just a specific film or director or series of films you're like, I would really love to talk about that, if you ever do it, let me know and I'll keep you in mind.
All right, sounds good.
And I appreciate it and enjoyed this conversation.
Same. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.